Hey everybody, we are live and starting off the next in the series of Apigee Up Close webcasts. So good morning everybody, or good afternoon or evening, depending on where you're watching from. So we're just kicking off this series, and we plan to add new episodes twice a month based on topics that you all would like to see based on popular demand. So you can sign up to as many of these as you like, of course, and I encourage you to come check them out frequently. And you'll be able to ask questions live, and we want to make it interactive and try as best we can to get to all of your questions. So a little bit about me. My name is Kevin Ford. I'm a customer engineer at Google. I'm on the Apigee team. So what I love best about my role is that I get to talk with customers about all the cool things they're doing in their API programs. And of course, security is usually one of the hottest topics on the table. So today we are going to talk about securing your APIs from attacks. And just a bit of housekeeping here. We'll be in presentation only mode. You can ask questions in the Q&A panel of the webcast application, and we'll get to them toward the end of the presentation. Today we're going to cover API threats and basically the attacks that we see out in the wild when people are running their API programs, the security capabilities that are part of the Apigee Edge API management platform, and then an introduction to an overview of Apigee Sense, which is an intelligent bot detection feature of the platform. And then we'll move on to demo of Apigee Sense and show how it works and how it mitigates bot attacks. Following that, we will hit some Q&A. Any system that has any value we're securing is going to be attacked, and it's been the case as long as you go back. As more businesses come online over the years, we've seen more and more cases of breaches in security, and I know you all read about them in the news all the time. But over the last decade, there's been a massive proliferation of mobile apps. Smartphone hardware played a big role in the explosion, but it wouldn't have been possible, or at least not nearly at the velocity that we've seen, that app explosion without web APIs. And most modern web apps are also driven entirely by web APIs. So for a little perspective here, there were nearly 200 billion app downloads in 2017. Globally, and that's across all the major app stores. That's smartphones and other platforms as well. And those apps generated around $100 billion that year. So, and just a bit of trivia, the average smartphone user runs 9 apps a day. The proliferation has caused, it was really made possible by APIs and has generated just a massive attack surface, I suppose. And there are around 20,000 catalog public APIs and hundreds of thousands of private ones run by enterprises. There's a reason I'm talking about these stats, and it's not just because the numbers are staggering when you think of how fast this app marketplace has exploded, but they're all run on web APIs. And I think by now we all know that we're familiar with the fact that all these things are running APIs, but I think a lot of people don't really understand how it changes security and why is this different than it was in the past. Because hackers and people who are going to attack your systems, they're still going to change anything about the way they're motivated. It's probably made those motivations even stronger. But they have a few things that drive them. The financial gain, sometimes even unscrupulous companies looking for a competitive advantage. If you remember a couple of years back, there were some major ride-sharing companies hailing and canceling each other's cars to hurt their revenue. And generally, the goal was to create a bad experience for drivers and passengers. So that's, one example of corporate API providers attempting to do damage to each other. And even what we call digital vandalism for shock value, or sometimes to just make some kind of a statement. And we know state actors have leveraged APIs to effect some desired outcome politically, even in recent times. So coming back around to the motivations, the kinds of attacks are basically the same, but what's changed, as I mentioned before, is the attack surface. At Apigee, we love APIs, as you all know, but hackers, they love APIs too. And what makes APIs awesome and why they've enabled this kind of proliferation of all these amazing apps that we use every day is that they're easy to program to. They have a consistent resource model. They're programmatically navigable, which makes them a lot easier to work with. We've got API documentation available online. In fact, that, is one of the defining criteria for a good API program. And if you think about some of the big API vendors like Google and Facebook, if they didn't publish good API documentation, a lot of developers wouldn't use them at all. So, API providers even publish client SDKs in, a variety of languages. So, in addition to that, they're often completely self-serve. And this, makes it's another hallmark of a good API program, but it's a great thing for hackers because they don't have to have a business relationship with the API provider. So these are all things we consider features of a good API program. The bad side effect of this is that these same features from an API product perspective can feel like a defect from a security architect's perspective because it's what hackers love best about your APIs. In cases where, I'm not going to talk about any of these in detail, but in cases where account data has been harvested, we're seeing literally minutes to hours later, users' credentials are being sold with Bitcoin, and high-profile accounts are taken over for a variety of purposes, often for vandalization as well as obviously attempting to take over accounts and perform transactions and these kinds of things. In some of these cases, the lack of traffic management opened the door to a ton of damage once credentials were compromised. And many of these businesses experience outages, in some cases lasting up to several days to deal with. So I just wanted to highlight, a few cases where API attacks caused not only a loss of revenue due to outages, but and the fact that there's a dramatically reduced usage if you have outages, but it affects consumer confidence in a big way and damages the reputation and the brand of the provider. Let's look at the Apigee platform and some of the security features. So we talked a little bit about the threats that are out there, and now I want to talk about the platform, the Apigee API management platform, and what kind of features we have in place to help you mitigate a lot of these issues. So we have features from end to end that represent the API security best practices. And if you look at the components in this diagram, from the client app over on the left, all the way to the back-end system, you'll see that we layer security across all constituents, so you have end-to-end protection. And I'm not going to talk about all these in detail, but we have OAuth 2 policies that you can just drop into your API flow and configure them easily to secure your users and the apps that are talking to your APIs. We also have a variety of rate limiting policies to defend against DOS attacks, as well as to maintain and manage client SLAs. We have, and those are quota policies as well, to manage those SLAs. We have role-based access control all the way throughout the platform. So not just in the management UI, for instance, for the providers who are creating APIs or developing them, as well as the management API for that, and the developer portal. So when you're productizing your API and engaging with consumers, there's role-based access control out there as well. So you can define which of your developers can deploy to a particular environment. You can share API documentation and sandbox selectively to trusted partners and maybe a different set of API documentation with a different access to a different backend environment to people who are just running in a trial and just testing out your API, for instance. And you can also configure mutual TLS between Apigee and the backends, but also, if you like, between Apigee and your clients. So Apigee also has the entire platform third-party pen tested regularly, and we share the reports publicly, and we support PCI and HIPAA for API workloads on our public cloud. So I just wanted to pause for a second and just remind everybody that we do have Q&A, and I will get to those. So as I'm talking about some of the features of the platform, just be aware of that, and feel free to ask any questions. I'll get to them shortly. So we looked at, just saw some of the security features in Apigee Edge, and we talked about OAuth, traffic management, encryption, access control, and some of the other features. But even when providers implement all of the security best practices, they're still being attacked and sometimes being breached. A couple of the most more common ones are account takeover and scraping. You see there's a lot of different ones here, though. I'll just talk about these because they're probably they're on the top of the list for the attacks that we see at high frequency. And account takeover is basically trying to steal the identity of a user, right? Forging transactions. And today, anybody can go buy, usernames and passwords off, nefarious sites that sell these kinds of things that were leaked at some kind of attack. And when hackers get their hands on these things, they're writing bots effectively to credential stuff against your authentication endpoints. And this is a form of a brute force attack. And if they have 100 million username password pairs, they'll know what authentication mechanism is in place because you declare this publicly in your developer portal, and they know exactly how to use your API. So they can also potentially see the quota that you have, and how many requests do you allow over a period of time. So that's all information that a hacker can use when they're attempting to breach accounts on your system. And another one we see a lot is scraping. That's a really common, not limited to a single industry or vertical. We see it a lot in finance. Think about aggregating, like rate aggregation, that kind of thing. We see it a lot all over in retail, travel, and there's everybody, any site that has valuable information is going to be a potential target for scraping. And these APIs have extremely valuable data that's not easy to create. Think about APIs like Yelp, IMDb, for instance. These programs have amassed valuable data over years of curation, and certainly they don't want to give it all away to somebody else so they can leverage all that value at no cost. So as an API provider, you really have to defend your data tooth and nail because it represents a significant part of the core value of the company. So here, I mentioned before that even if you have a properly secured API, you can experience attacks. And when I say properly secured, I'm talking about conventional security. You've implemented OAuth, you have TLS, you have rate limits in place, all of these kinds of things. And a lot of enterprise security teams also have CDNs and WAFs in place, and naturally they'll put Apigee behind these. There's nothing wrong with that. It's where we sit with a lot of our customers. And WAFs are also well suited for handling some kinds of attacks. And this diagram is supposed to show, if you look on the left, you've got all these legitimate clients, and then commingled with them are bad actors, who have probably written bots that are attempting to access your API. So the WAF is capable of blocking kind of with a sledgehammer approach. It knows that you might want to block everything from a particular region, a particular country, or a known set of blacklisted IPs, as an example. So for that, it's pretty effective. But lots of things still get through, and we see this all the time with our customers. As I said, the majority of our customers do sit in this kind of pattern where we are behind some type of web application firewall. So these requests that are getting through need to be managed. And in this case, this is where, even with the right security policies, bot traffic is sometimes going through. Now, with Apigee Sense, like to respond to this issue with our customers, we started running pilots and found that to effectively handle the bot traffic, we needed to focus on the bad behaviors, not just the parameters like the IP and the region and so on. So we are well suited for that because with our position in the request traffic flow, we have access to all this metadata, and we understand the context and how this works. And in addition, we are able to look at the behaviors that are API specific and say, not just blocking, for instance, a particular key, but if a particular key accesses many more resources than would be typical, for instance, one client wouldn't typically access 100,000 products from your product catalog, as an example. So we can use all the data that we know about this traffic and combine it with behavioral patterns that we see across many, many customers and leverage all of that to make a much more effective security layer to keep those bots out away from your backend systems. I mean, as I mentioned, web security and API security aren't the same. It's a different programming model. There are different attack vectors. And if you're running an API program and you care about your users, your reputation, it's important that you have security that's purpose-built for APIs. So all of our customers, Apigee Edge customers, already have access to the full suite of security policies and best practices to lock down their APIs. And so up to this point, I talked about why APIs are a really attractive target for attackers and some of the common types of attacks. We've talked about some of Apigee's security features to protect the APIs. Now I want to pivot a little bit and talk about Apigee Sense, which is what I was mentioning in that slide where we're applying some behavioral approach to bot traffic. And it gives you an additional layer of security. Protects your APIs from bad bots by automatically identifying and alerting administrators to the suspicious behaviors. Again, it's not just based on data points like an IP address. It's bad behaviors. And administrators can then take action based on those alerts so they can maintain the user experience of their clients and, of course, protect the back ends. So, of course, we alert, but we offer really flexible, automated ways to remediate the traffic. And I'll dig into that in a minute, what I mean by flexible remediation. This here is what you're seeing in this image is a threat map from Apigee Sense. I'm going to show you a demo, and we'll look into that later, so I won't dive into it here. Let's talk about why this is better, this approach, this behavioral approach. And it's not better, it's one piece of the puzzle. You need, of course, all of the API security best practices we've been talking about. Those must be in place. But why is Sense as an additional layer something you need to be considering? So Apigee already captures all of the API metadata as it flows through the platform. And Apigee Sense studies the call patterns, and it uses that to identify aberrations in traffic. And it is unique to each of our customers, and you can tune your own rules for detection, as well as to define the specific behavior that you want once bad activity, I should say suspicious activity, is detected. And it all runs in the background. So you're focusing on, your APIs that drive your business, and in the background, Sense is detecting behavior and letting you see it all through a great dashboard. We do analyze traffic in real time and trigger alerts. And I mentioned that we have anomaly detection that's based on behavior, and we'll see what that means. You can tune. We'll look at the list of rules, the kinds of things that are detected, and it's a rich set of rules, and you have the ability to customize them based on your needs. How about protection? So we've covered a little bit about detection, and we'll dive into what those rules look like and the kinds of things we do detect. When we do detect the potentially bad behavior, suspicious activities, your administrators are alerted immediately and then can decide what kind of action to take. And this is another way we're different from a lot of different security tools, is that you can decide it's suspicious. We don't know that it's a bad bot. Many of our customers write their own bots, write applications that iteratively hit their APIs, or they expose data to partners who want to do scraping of their data, for instance, and that's in some cases, that's an acceptable use. You have the opportunity to confirm the behaviors that Apigee detects, that Apigee Sense detects, and then you decide what action to take on that traffic. Once you do that, Apigee Sense will enforce the rules, and it will enforce the rules that allow you to either allow the traffic, block the traffic, or flag the suspicious behaviors in real time. And we'll look at that a little more in a minute, what that means and what flagging does. So another interesting thing to note here is that Sense operates in a closed loop, and yeah, we call this Kava, and it's a loop where we capture metadata about traffic, we analyze it, and then offer visualization to you, and then the ability for you to act. Now, we're already capturing all the metadata and analytics, so this all happens offline in a closed loop asynchronously. I mentioned before the ability to flag requests, so just to reiterate, you can allow the traffic. Once suspicious activity is detected, you can allow it, you can block it as a rule, or you can flag it. And what that means is Apigee Sense, if it detects something suspicious, you can have it flag it, which will add a header, and you can define what the header means, what the header says. And once that header is in place, the traffic will flow through Apigee, and then you can add a policy to perform a particular action. Maybe you want to send, maybe you know this is bad traffic, but you don't want to reject it immediately because the bot author will simply, change the rules a bit and hit you again. So you can instead maybe send that traffic to some type of a honeypot. Maybe you have a different back end, or you want to skew price data if it's prices. You might want to send bad data, or even just delay the response. You might be okay with it, but you want to reduce or reduce the speed of the transactions or that kind of thing to basically limit the impact. So that's another kind of unique feature. So I want to talk. I have a little visualization here, which is how I think of protection. So if you look at this as an API provider, it looks secure, and they're using Apigee, and they're using all of our best practices. The walls are built with OAuth, so they have OAuth protection wrapping this fortress to keep out the unwanted traffic. And you can see they have a front gate here, which is the only obvious way in, and that could be thought of as a throttle, like your quota mechanism to throttle your traffic. But one problem here is there's no visibility. So without having visibility, you can't be completely secure. So what I mean by that is, at the edge, at the perimeter of this castle, there are trees coming right up to it, blocking visibility. There could be attackers chiseling away at the walls, attempting to scale them, and this could be going on for weeks, and there could be thousands of them attacking, and you have no idea they're there. Without visibility and knowing that somebody's attempting to attack you, over time, they'll eventually find a way in. So let me show you a different picture and why it's more secure and why I relate this to, in this API provider analogy, one that's using Apigee Sense. So similarly, they have a front gate and the addition of a moat to throttle traffic and protect them. But Apigee Sense allows you to know when a bot is attempting, not after it's already broken in. It lets you know when they're attempting because they're doing things that you don't want them to do. They're sending 250 requests a minute because you allow 300 requests a minute. They're sending those requests attempting to penetrate your wall. So by alerting you to say, hey, somebody's attempting this, you gain visibility. So you can see an attacker from a much greater distance. And that's why this analogy is a really good one for what Apigee Sense gives you, is it gives you a big advance notice of anything potentially happening, creating that long-running visibility. And then lastly, protection. Once you have that visibility and you identify that somebody's attempting to attack you, and you have the ability with automated rules to set up how to handle that traffic. Do you want to block it? Do you want to flag it and treat it specially? So this is a much better way for you to run your API program, is to have the greatest amount of visibility you can and know about attacks really early. With that, I'm going to switch over to a demo and show you the platform in action. All right, so here we are, and this is the Apigee Sense UI, and it's running live. I have an organization, Apigee organization, which is the high-level unit of tenancy. If you're a customer, you will have one or more organizations. And this shows an overall view of what's going on over, in this case, I'm looking at the last day. I can look at the last week or the last month. And it shows me the overall traffic coming into my platform, as well as what it detects as a bot. And also trending. Is my bot traffic increasing or decreasing? Is my total traffic increasing or decreasing? And I can drill down into all of these. I'm not going to go too deep in this because it's a large topic to cover, and I want to cover as much as possible in the next few minutes. So you also get this threat map showing you where your attacks, where these suspicious activity is coming from. And I can click on any of these and get a list of the IP addresses, the region they're in. Down here, in addition, I'm able to see of these, all of these suspected or detected potential bots, how many of them are being flagged, how many of them are being blocked, and how many are being allowed. So let's look into a little bit more. I talked about the rules, the types of behaviors we detect, and those are expressed here as rules. I want to show you what some of those look like. So we have things like robot abuser, a brute guesser, OAuth abuser. Let's look at an OAuth abuser. And as I mentioned, you have the ability to tune the rules. So we set kind of same defaults here, and we're saying, and the rule says that, you know, if at least 100 calls come from a specific IP address, and it's 100 separate sessions, then, you know, with at most 10 user agents, that will trigger this rule. And these you can tune to whatever you like. That's one example, but we have a whole list of the types of things we've seen, and these come out of working with a lot of customers over a lot of years and analyzing traffic and working with them to, you know, define what are the types of attacks that we see. So now let's look at a report that shows what's actually happening. So this is loading here, but I have this partition view and a list view. The list view will show everything, individual attacks. Here I can define, let's say that I want to look at particular countries. So I can group the suspicious activity by whatever I like. The reason for why Sense detected it as a bot, the country, particular IP ranges, or I can hop into the list view and look at the actual findings. Now these, as you can see, have been set to flag, which means that any requests that come in that match this will get flagged, and the request will have a header that I can then treat differently in Apigee. Again, maybe I want to send them to a different backend or delay the response or something like that. And then some traffic is blocked. If I want to change that behavior, I can simply allow it. It gives me a rule. I call this my partner who I'm allowing to create a bot to write against me. And the activity, when do I want this to expire? I might want this to run for perpetuity. I might want it to run just for a short period of time so I can then kind of revisit the behavior later and actively manage it. So when I create this rule, it's going to be automatically enforced in real time. So that's done. Now, let's look at the protection side. What you just saw, that rule creation, was part of protection. And I'll look here at the rules that I've got in place. So I have rules here that are named. I want to flag my guessers so that I can do something interesting with them. I want to block these types of attacks from a particular region. I have now my trusted partner that I'm allowing, And I can tune all my rules here. I can create them just like you saw before. And I can get an overall report of what's happening based on those rules. And I can see here, these are the IP addresses that I'm allowing in. These are ones I'm specifically blocking. And I can see, again here, the counts of how I'm treating all these requests. And then my flagged IPs here based on these rules. So this is all, this report is all happening in real time. The protection's in real time. And that's I mean, how you gain that kind of visibility that I was talking about before, and get really good headlights into who's starting today to attempt to breach our walls. So at this point, I would like to open it up for questions. All right, so first question is, do I need to add a policy to my API proxy to make sense work? So let me first start by saying that I believe on this webcast we have some customers, current customers of Apigee, and also some people who are considering Apigee or even just running APIs and not using any API management platform at all. So when this question, the individual is talking about proxies, that's what we call in Apigee, an API proxy sits between your client and your back end, and it's where you define all of the policies, like what security you'd like to apply to the API, how you want to throttle it, all that kind of thing. So you don't need to add a policy to your proxies to make sense work. It happens outside of the way you configure your proxies. However, in the examples I showed you where you're flagging traffic, if you want to do something with that traffic once you've flagged it, then you would add a policy. You would add a policy to maybe route to a different backend, maybe to redact some data, or maybe to mix up or skew the data. So the policies would come into play if you wanted to do honeypot type scenarios. But all of the rest of it happens automatically by the platform. Okay, so what kind of latency does Sense add? So Sense, as I mentioned, runs asynchronously all the time, continuously, and it doesn't in itself add latency as it's collecting and detecting data. That all happens completely offline to your APIs. It adds less than 10 milliseconds when you're implementing protection. So when you do detect bots and you're protecting, it adds extremely low latency as it's protecting. And the protection, of course, is the action of blocking it, allowing it, or flagging it. Next, is Sense available to all customers, or is it limited to enterprise? So Sense is currently offered to enterprise customers, and we have different licenses. So enterprise customers have access to Sense on our cloud. On-prem customers, so that's I just answered the Sense available for on-prem customers. It's only available to cloud at the moment. We have plans to make it available as part of our hybrid offering, where we will do all of the detection and protection on the cloud and push that data to hybrid. But that's something that we are planning on for a future release. Next, does Sense look across all customer data to identify malicious patterns? As far as patterns, so we've looked at all customer data and worked with our customers to develop the patterns and develop the models that we use to define and learn what behaviors we should be protecting against. However, when you're using Sense as a customer, none of your data is commingled at all with any other customer's data. All of the detection and protection occur only with your own data. We're close to out of time here, so I'm going to stop here. There are a few more questions that we'll follow up with separately. And at this point, I wanted to send out a quick poll to the audience just to ask, so we can learn a little bit about you, and also we'd like to find out what you'd like to see in future webcasts. So let's move on. So we just want to know a little bit about your familiarity with Apigee, and you know, if you're interested in learning more, if you're using it. If you could help us out, it would be great to learn a little bit about you all. All right, great. So I wanted to wrap up here and just announce that we have another webcast coming up in a couple of weeks about building a composite API. And this is going to teach you everything you need to know to be able to create mashups that orchestrate between multiple targets and combine those into a single response. So this is going to be a really interesting one. If you want to get more in-depth, we have a series called Virtual API Jam, where you can go and you can take basically their labs, their hands-on labs, where you work with the Apigee platform, and it'll take you through a series of use cases that cover most of the end-to-end types of things you do when you're running an API program, and you can do that all virtually. And if you would like to get have a session one-on-one, that if you're interested in evaluating the platform, if you'd like to see demonstrations or just discuss the capabilities, you can reach out by email to the address you see here on your screen, and this will be in the resources section as well. And of course, if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to me directly, Kevin Ford. My email is also in the resources, so feel free to hit me up with any questions you have or any follow-up that you'd like from me. And with that, we'll call it a wrap. Thank you all, and have a great day.